this video, I'm going to show you guys how to build the best $1,300 gaming PC you can assemble right now. I'll be combining some really great components that provide awesome looks and performance with NZXT's new and updated H5 Flow, a chassis I immediately like the look of. This is a build that's geared up for super high frame rate gaming at 1080p and awesome 1440p performance too, with elements of future-proofing that help to make this build good for now and into the future. Let's do this. Take your build to the next level with Apacer's sleek RGB DDR5 memory. Available with a wide range of speeds and capacities, the Apacer Panther lineup has a kit for everyone. A great looking aluminium alloy heatsink offers excellent heat dissipation, while Intel XMP 3.0 and AMD Expo certification means this RAM is a great fit for Team Red and Team Blue systems. Plus, RGB support in Asus, GeekaWhat, MSI and ASRock software suites makes this an easy addition to any build. Learn more at the first link in the description below. In many respects, $1,300 is a kind of weird price point to base a system around, but for 1440p gaming, it's perfect. It gives us a little bit more room to play with over $1,000 where we have to make some compromises while not costing as much as that $1,500 price point and still giving you pretty similar performance. Now I'm going to start things off by looking at the case first of all, and this is quite exciting really. It's the new NZXT H5 Flow RGB. Now if I'm being really honest, some of NZXT's latest cases have at times been a bit hit and miss. I like the H6, I think that's a unique angle, quite literally. Well for me the new H7 is just a little bit too big, even if the core design ideas are pretty good. This, on the other hand, is perfectly proportioned in my opinion. You get lovely mesh ventilation at the front, and behind this panel, which easily pops out, you see these really nice single frame 3 fans, so that's 3 120mm in a single unit. You get NZXT's new side profile design, which gives the case sort of a floating look from the side, and it's all mesh along the side and underneath as well, which is great to see. Power supply goes in the usual area, and you can see the top panel pops off nice and easily. Spin the case around to the back and there is more mesh airflow and ventilation too, which is great to see. This is an area in the past that NZXT have really let themselves down, I want to say, in some of their cases. Thankfully not today. Loads of mesh at the bottom and a decent amount of cable management room too. Really like what I see here. The only weird thing I don't like so far, other than the back black fan, that definitely could be RGB to match the front, is the I/O. You only get power, one USB 3 and a Type-C. Definitely could have had 2 USB-Cs, and I think, to be honest, that would just make a lot more sense for most end users. Now with the case stripped down, I'm going to go ahead and get the motherboard ready, as that's what I'll be installing into the chassis. You'll notice under this slightly large and illustrious pile of hardware, spoiler alert for the GPU, the motherboard I've chosen for this system, which is GeekaByte's B650 Gaming X AX. Now that means we are going Ryzen, and in the current landscape of real problems with Intel's 12th, 13th, 14th gen processors, this makes the most sense by a long way. Now the B650 chipset gives us access to Ryzen 7000 and 9000 and future 10 or 11,000 generations through to 2027, while this specific board also gives us Wi-Fi, CPU and RAM overclocking. Now as if that wasn't enough, it does all of this at a really agreeable price point. We're talking well under $200 for this board, though I'll leave latest pricing and availability for all regions down in the description below. Now when it comes to choosing a CPU for your AM5 motherboard, it gets a little bit complicated. Now for this build, I've picked up this, the Ryzen 5 9600X. This is AMD's latest Ryzen 5 chip, but let me explain before you go down to the comments and go, James, why didn't you just get a 7600X for less money and achieve the same performance? Now if you've been living under a rock, or you just haven't spent hours consuming reviews of the latest CPUs, which is totally understandable, you will have missed AMD's 9000 series, I don't want to say controversy, but sort of disappointment. This is intended to build upon the success of the Ryzen 7000 series by giving better IPC. That basically means more instructions at the same clock speeds, making the chips a lot more efficient. Now, the Ryzen 9600X is better than the 7600X it replaces. The problem is just not better by very much, and the price lift is in the region of about $50 to $70, depending on, as I say, the latest pricing and availability. For this build, I want to try the 9600X, as I'd like to give it a fair shot, but if you want to keep within that $1,300 budget, you'll need to drop down to the 7600X, which, as we've already discussed, provides very similar levels of performance. I'll leave both options linked in the description below. The only major upside with this is the efficiency. You're going to use less power on the 9600X than the 7600X, so that's, well, it's kind of something if you care about that. I'll be installing that in a moment, but first let me walk you through the memory. This is an AMD Expo certified kit from G.Skill, their Trident Z5 Neo. This is one of my personal favorite RAM kits as far as aesthetics go. We've been using the white kit recently and love that. I mean, isn't that just gorgeous? The other reason I've gone for this, other than the 6000 megahertz speed and fairly low latencies, is all to do with memory training. Now on Ryzen, there are big problems right now with RAM just taking ages to get started in the motherboard and initialize. This kit is one of the more reliable units we found, so stick with the kit from G.Skill, or Corsair's Vengeance is pretty solid. Same with Team Group's T-Force Delta as well. Talking of Team Group, I've gone for a Team Group SSD, the MP44L. This is a 1TB drive that we've seen really great performance on in lots of videos recently, and in our review of this drive, which you can check out in the card section now. I'm going to go ahead and install all of these components into the motherboard. CPU is first, just lift up the little arm, line up the triangle on the CPU with that of the CPU socket, and slot it into place. RAM or memory is next up. That of course goes into the RAM DIMM slots, second and fourth slots in particular for this build, while the M.2 drive is last. For this, you need a smaller screwdriver, and you want to install it into the slot just above at where your GPU is going to sit a little bit later. At this stage of the build, you could go ahead and move the motherboard into the case if you were using a liquid cooler, but I'm not. Instead, I'm using this, the APNX AP1-V. Now, if you've not heard of APNX before, it's basically like the premium brand that's been spun out of Aerocool, and we've been pretty impressed so far. They had some interesting stuff at Computex, and this cooler, I think, is the perfect fit for the build we're doing today. NZXT is all about having a build that's like really clean. Look at that. Now it's like this metal, like one-piece unibody design. It's actually proper metal. That then basically hides and masks the heatsink, so it's still like a standard tower cooler underneath. And it's just really good looking. Nice little chamfer here as well. Even the middle of the fan is like a dark metallic. It's just so nice. Big shout out, by the way, to Overclockers here in the UK for sending this out. I'll link them down in the description below. It's also available on Amazon, and over in the States you can get it at Newegg too. Now, in terms of installation, I have no idea how it installs, so I'm going to consult this and find out. Basically, you get this metal mounting plate with screw threads on, and what you do is this sits around the CPU and allows the cooler to go on nice and easily. Add the red stoppers over each of the holes on the motherboard, then add this universal mounting plate in and screw that down. Once you've done that, bit of thermal paste before dropping the cooler on and tightening up with each of the screws on the left and the right. Get this nice and firm now and wire up the fan and RGB cables later once the motherboard is in the case. The next stage then is to move this into the case, and I'm quite intrigued to see how well the cooler matches with the H5. As far as where the motherboard's going to screw in, you'll see there are standoffs at the top of the case, standoffs down the middle, and then standoffs 2 down the bottom. You just have to be careful of this sort of sticky out cable cover when screwing the motherboard into place. As I say, 9 screws in total, and the raised center standoff will hold the board into place while I go ahead and secure it down. Oh, and if you're wondering where the screws are from, they're from this brown accessory box, which you will actually need to cut out of the case with a pair of scissors, which is very hard one-handed. Yep, got it. Everything you need for the build is going to be in this magic little box. Now, I'm next going to do the power supply. It might be tempted at this stage to chuck the GPU in, but trust me, do this PSU. It's a lot more boring, but it's going to make your life easier because you can access all the ports and connections really easily. Now, this is NZXT H5 Gold, and I think this is one of their new ATX 3.1 designs. Never used it before, but it's got a 10-year warranty, which feels really impressive. Now then, if I pull this out of the box, you can see the power supply comes in its own protective bag and is also complete with all the cables required for the H5. I'm not going to go for any cable extensions. The build's pretty black. You're not going to see them. Instead, I'm just going to opt to install the default cables. And for this build, we really don't need that many. I am going to pop a SATA power cable in. That's going to give some power for things like RGB controllers. I'm also going to pop in a pair of these PCI 6+2 pin connectors. You can see, due to some of the issues people have been having recently, it looks as though NZXT have split these out. So rather than having 2 6+2 pins on one harness, they're their own harnesses. Motherboard power is also going to be next. That's our largest 20+4 pin. Finally, there should be, an 8-pin, a 4+4 pin CPU power cable as well. Chuck all of those in, slide the PSU into the back of the case. Something to bear in mind with the layout, you've got to go fan up. So the fan has to be pulling air from inside of the case chamber, as there is no mesh on the bottom and no clearance due to the way the feet work. Then a simple case of wiring up all the cables for this build, CPU to the top left, motherboard to the right hand side, and then all of those JFP1 cables, starting with HD audio, front panel connectors, USB 3 Type A, and USB USB 3 Type-C. Nice and easy, in theory. Just follow along in slow motion or check out our full cables and wiring guide in the cards now if you're a bit confused. Now, as well as the nice Unifan design at the front, NZXT also very kindly sent me their F240, which is the all-in-one 240mm variant, and an extra 360, which I used in my last build in the H7. Now, this 240 can technically go at the bottom of the case. The problem with that is that the power supply is actually trying to pull air out of the case because there's no mesh on the bottom for the PSU. So by putting the fans here, I'm just going to be fighting the power supply. So what I'm going to do instead is put the 240mm at the top, or at least that's what I thought originally. Having checked, the 360mm does fit at the top without any problems. Oh no, hang on, I'm wrong, it doesn't fit. What? I've just checked with our website maestro, who will have reviewed this case on our website, which you can check out now. It fits a 360 at the top in terms of like, it fits, but it doesn't officially fit a 360 at the top, which is so stupid. Yes, this seems very first world problem, me moaning that I can't put this up there and I'm going to have to put this 240mm instead, but it just seems a shame. I will change the rear fan out for an RGB one too, then I'll drown my sorrows and return for the GPU installation. Angry. With all that finally sorted, it's time for the GPU. And for this build, there could be really no other option. The 7900 GRE. Now, this is cheaper than Nvidia's 4070 Super, but provides pretty comparable performance. I mean, this will even hold its own in some titles against the 70 Ti and the newer 70 Ti Super. Ray tracing isn't as good, and FSR is still a way behind DLSS 3, something which can make a big difference in certain titles. I think, though, the GRE makes the most sense for this build, based on both our internal gaming performance testing and also based on the budget constraints. Go for Nvidia and you're going to have to spend more money than what this currently retails for. Now, this GeekaWhat card looks great and hopefully matches the GeekaWhat motherboard. The whole thing matches, I would say, pretty well. So on this chassis, there's a little cover. What I'm going to do is loosen that. So give each screw a turn and a half, no more. Move that over to the side and then, yep, second and third PCI slots as normal. Keep the screws as these will secure the card into place. My favorite 1440p GPU, to be honest. 1080p, this thing is like, it's all good for whatever you throw at it. Then push the little clip back, and slide the graphics card into place. A little bit tight with this metal cover. That is actually slightly touching, but I think it'll be fine. Couple of screws to secure the card in, and then of course remember to give it power with one or two of those 6+2 pin power cables. To be clear, you need to use both. I more meant, depending on the GPU you've got, is going to determine how many power cables it needs. Don't try and power your GPUs with half the required cables, please. I'm then just going to go ahead and return all of the panels back into place. I do need to spend a bit of time wiring up these fans, which I'm hoping isn't going to be too complicated. And the fact that 2 of the 3 sort of fan zones in this case are all powered by 1 or 2 cables, based on the fact it's an all-in-one unit, should make life significantly easier. I've got to say, that is one good-looking build. Give me a few moments to get this all tidied up, and I'll see you in just a few secs for those all-important gaming benchmarks. Looking good. I've got to say, I'm really pleased with how this turned out, and I did enjoy building an NZXT's new H5. I definitely think it's an improvement over the last generation. However, how does the performance of this build stack up? Is the GRE a winning option for this price point? Well, the long and short of it is, yes, I think it is. Black Myth Wukong is the first example of this. At 1440p very high settings with FSR enabled and frame gen turned on, the build delivered 115 FPS on average. Not only did the game look visually really quite fantastic at this resolution, but this frame rate's more than good enough for this kind of title and led to a really smooth gaming experience. Alan Wake 2 wasn't too dissimilar either at 1440p high with FSR again enabled and set to quality. No frame generation this time, but we'll use what we can get. The build again performed well, 101 FPS on average. It's more of an RPG than a competitive first-person shooter, so this is totally fine, and 100 FPS is a really respectable level to be at. Call of Duty's Warzone is next at 1440p high, FSR again enabled and set to the quality preset, FSR 3 this time, and the build again delivered a really good set of results. At 1440p, 142 FPS was the frame rate of the day, and I was pleased with how this turned out. Hogwarts Legacy is next on the list of testing. 1440p high was once again the chosen resolution, and here the build achieved an average of 118 FPS. Hogwarts Legacy is one of my favourite titles, really like this game as far as those RPG games go, and at 1440p again looked good. But what if you want first-person shooters shooters? What if you want maximum frame rate at 1080p competitive settings? Well, my friends, Fortnite is the game for you. Our test in Fortnite at this competitive settings lineup really delivered great results. Again, 293 FPS on average in this build was mightily impressive, and I was super pleased with how this turned out. Moving through into Apex Legends, which rounds off the benchmarking suite today, tested here at 1440p high settings, and the GRE did wonders with 255 FPS on average. This is actually more than in a recent 4070 super build with identical settings. Here, of course, being an FPS competitive title, frame rate really matters, and this build did not disappoint. What do you guys think of this system? I'll link all the parts that make it possible down at the links in the description below. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.